Hey, everybody. Zombie Simpsons got renewed again. Crowd turns, shrugs. Can I have my shirts back at least? Kirk Van Houten. Okay, you heard the lady. Why don't you take it outside, alright? Pyro. Dead Homer Society Manifesto. Most Simpsons discussion boards and websites suffer from a never-ending tension between people who defend the current incarnation of the show and people who cannot stand it. The former group's arguments often boil down to saying that it's still funnier than 95% of television shows and that if you disagree you're just being a killjoy. Fuck that. The program on Fox that bills itself as The Simpsons bears only the faintest resemblance to our favorite television show of all time. Today it is a hollow shell, over-animated, underthought out, and thoroughly mediocre. The sooner it ends the better off we'll all be. Dead Homer Society was formed for two reasons. 1. To create an online home for Simpsons fans who outright despise most, if not all, of the double-digit seasons but revere the old ones the way religious types do their stupid books. 2. To create a central place for people who want to see the show finally taken off the air. Here's the basic outline. Seasons 1 to 6, The Simpsons Season 7, 1 bad episode. Seasons 8 to 11, Mayday, Mayday, we're going down. Season 12 plus, Zombie Simpsons. It has no pulse and no intelligence, but it just won't fucking die. Plenty of people will quibble with the above, some like to separate out Season 1 and or 2 for example, but in the main it's what we think. If you seriously disagree then this is not the Simpsons site for you. If, on the other hand, you think the show fell off in the late 90s and is now basically unwatchable, not only are you correct, but you're also amongst friends. Tell Aronson and Zykowski. Share. Email. deadhomersociety@gmail. Run a Simpsons site or Twitter account? Let One bad episode. Posted by Charlie Sweatpants. Ah, come on, Dad. This can be the miracle that saves The Simpsons Christmas. If TV has taught me anything, it's that miracles always happen to poor kids at Christmas. It happened to Tiny Tim, it happened to Charlie Brown, it happened to the Smurfs, and it's gonna happen to us. Bart Simpson. The Dead Homer Society Manifesto lists Season 7 as having one bad episode. That episode is Marge Be Not Proud. Please understand that we only consider Marge Be Not Proud a bad episode by the towering standards of early season Simpsons. Compared with the wretched dreck that is Zombie Simpsons, it is a model of wit and comic efficiency. But when compared to its contemporaries in Season 7, and its hallowed predecessors in Seasons 1 to 6, it is noticeably wanting. It is the first Simpsons episode one ever watched when I felt, in the pit of my stomach, the wrenching ball of embarrassment, disappointment, and confusion that I've since come to associate with Zombie Simpsons. It was the first episode at which I shook my head at its simplicity, it was the first episode when I felt like I was watching television. For its first 6 seasons, The Simpsons had viciously mocked and relentlessly parroted conventional television. That was one of the things that made it great. It was animated and had no laugh track, but other than that it had all of the trappings of the standard family comedy, the working father, the precocious children, and the housewife who holds everything together. But instead of following the usual formula, it used those cosmetic similarities to mercilessly gut that which came before it. Marge Be Not Proud was the first time the show ever sincerely employed the rote, brainless patterns of a normal program. It was, in the parlance of crappy television, a very special episode. Sitcoms of all stripes occasionally have these very special episodes wherein one of the characters comes under threat from a health crisis or makes a decision which runs afoul of American morality. This could be trying drugs, or cheating somehow, or even stealing something. It was that indulgence in the cheap storytelling of regular television. Bart steals game - Bart gets caught - Bart feels bad - Marge finds out - Marge distrusts Bart - Bart feels worse - Bart makes good - they, literally, hug at the end. That made Marge Be Not Proud an indisputable first for The Simpsons. It's not as though The Simpsons had never explicitly, and seriously, shown emotional family moments before. In the first season, Marge rescued Lisa from bad motherly advice, moaning Lisa. In the second season, Marge accused Bart of ruining Thanksgiving, Bart vs. Thanksgiving. In the third season, Homer didn't want to go to Bart's soapbox derby race, Saturdays of Thunder. In the fourth season, Marge felt ignored by Homer during her play, A Streetcar Named Desire. In the fifth season, Marge threw Homer out, Secrets of a Successful Marriage. And in the sixth season, Lisa's wedding, collapsed because of her love for Homer. Genuine emotional moments were often handled within the framework of the show, and The Simpsons knew how to play them with a light touch, using them to swiftly advance the story and then getting them out of the way. But in Marge Be Not Proud, the emotional moments don't just linger, they grind the story to a halt with multiple sequences that are both painfully long and clumsily obvious. This is a tendency that has grown considerably worse over time, but it found its first expression in Marge Be Not Proud. What's so amazing about it is that it really is an outcast in Season 7. It was produced right after Mother Simpson, which had ample opportunities to delve into schlock and didn't, and it preceded scenes from the class struggle in Springfield, Bart the Fink, A Fish Called Selma and Summer of 4 Feet 2, all of which could have gone the same route but kept moving instead. It is the use of that shopworn, moralistic plot, and the agonizingly glacial pace at which it unfolds, that makes Marge Be Not Proud the harbinger of zombie Simpsons, a precursor to that feculently unwatchable TV charade. It is the first bad episode. The astonishing coincidence in all of this is that Marge Be Not Proud aired 6 years, to the day, after The Simpsons premiered with Simpsons roasting on an open fire. That's why December 17th is Simpsons Day. This date saw both the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega, the dawn and the dusk. Tell Aronson and Zykowski. Share. Related. Reading Digest, Victorious War of the Simpsons edition 13 December 2013 inches Reading Digest. Behind Us Forever. Zombie Simpsons, How the Best Show Ever Became the Broadcasting Undead. Zombie ADJ remaining animate despite lack of thought or consciousness. Simpsons N, an American television program. By almost any measurement, The Simpsons is the most influential television comedy ever created. It has been translated into every major language on Earth and dozens of minor ones. It has spawned entire genres of animation, and had more books written about it than all but a handful of American presidents. Even its minor characters have become iconic, and the titular family is recognizable in almost every corner of the planet. It is a definitive and truly global cultural phenomenon, perhaps the biggest of the television age. As of this writing, if you flip on Fox at 8 p.m. on Sundays, you will see a program that bills itself as The Simpsons. It is not The Simpsons. That show, the landmark piece of American culture that debuted on December 17, 1989, went off the air more than a decade ago. The replacement is a hopelessly mediocre imitation that bears only a superficial resemblance to the original. It is the unwanted sequel, the stale spin-off, the creative dry hole that is kept pumping in the endless search for more money. It is Zombie Simpsons. Zombie Simpsons, How the Best Show Ever Became the Broadcasting Undead is a 22,000-word minibook that attempts to explain two things. How The Simpsons became the unprecedentedly awesome show it was. Why it declined into the bland and formulaic thing that still airs on Sundays at 8 p.m. on Fox. Table of Contents. Part 1, Putting the Spring in Springfield. 1, What is Zombie Simpsons? Click this to start reading the book. 2, The Terrible World of 1980s Television. 3, The Most Anti-Authority Show Ever. 4, You're watching Fox, shame on you. Part 2, Show Business is a Hideous Bitch Goddess. 5, The Retirement. 6, The Deaths. Part 3, Stories of Degradation and Humiliation. Season 7, A Very Special Episode. Season 8, Frank Grimes and the Phony Kidnapping. Season 9, Armin Tamzarian and the Death of Story. Season 10, Jerk-Ass Homer Gets a Job. Season 11, The Destruction of Springfield. Season 12 and beyond, Zombie Simpsons. Appendices. Appendix A, a note on the term Zombie Simpsons. Appendix B, Episode Numbers versus Production Numbers. Appendix C, December 17th, Simpsons Day. Appendix D, The Defense of Mike Scully. Appendix E, Yeah, It Was That Good, 1 million AD. Other mini-books by Charlie Sweatpants, Tapped In, Simpsons Tapped Out Players, click here. J.J. Abrams is bad at movies, Star Wars and Star Trek fans, click here. A brief note on footnotes and citations. Footnotes with Arabic numerals, 3, 5, etc., are asides or further explanations that are meant to be read with the text. Notes with Roman numerals, 4, 9, etc., are citations of individual source data intended for reference purposes. You should be able to click either kind, read it, and then get back to your place in the text with your back button. My apologies for not having a better way to do this, but this is very simple HTML. The entire book is available for free on the linked pages above. However, if you enjoy it or feel like supporting this site, you can purchase a DRM-free copy for your Kindle or Kindle-enabled device for $2.99 at Amazon. Why $2.99? Because that's the minimum price Amazon demands for only taking 30% of the gross instead of 65%. Purchase from Amazon. The book is available both for free and for a minimal price on the theory that some people, especially the kind of people with the disposable income to own Kindles, iPads, and the like, are willing and able to pay for words if the price is reasonable and the payment is easy to make. At the same time, restricting the book to only those people would be self-defeating and stupid. Many fewer people would read it, and trying to use digital rights management and other convoluted anti-piracy measures to police the internet is a fool's errand. Therefore, the only sensible thing to do is make it easy for people to purchase and easy to get for free. One final note, I am not the least bit above making revisions should any of you fine Simpsons fans out there discover that I've made any factual errors. My sources are all stated plainly, but that doesn't mean that I haven't made an unfounded assumption somewhere or screwed up some part of the history of the show. If you come across something where I'm just flat out wrong and you can point me to some credible evidence of my wrongness, please tell me. It's the only way I'll learn. People whose time and labor are non-monetarily appreciated. It's a little thin, but that's okay. It could be a check. Alright, there's no check, just a card. But don't panic, I'm sure it tells us what we're getting and where we can pick it up. Homer Simpson. Thanks go first and foremost to my blogging partners Dave and Mad John. Jeebus only knows how many hours you two put into our site, but it was a lot. And without the site, this little mini-book would never have existed. For indispensable help in keeping my grammatical embarrassments to a minimum, I am deeply grateful to my dad and my friend Liz. Thank you for paying attention in English class. Enormous thanks are also due to anyone who ever started or maintained a Simpsons website. Dead Homer Society would never have gotten anywhere if sites like snpp.com, nohomers.net, and all the rest hadn't endured years of subpar episodes and countless attacks from the legal locusts at News Corp's command. Finally, thanks to everyone who has ever landed at Dead Homer Society, especially those of you who pointed out errors in this book. Whether you're a regular commenter or one of the vastly more numerous people who just read the site, your continuing interest in The Simpsons, even after all these years, is a testament to how good it was. Thank you. Tell Aronson and Zykowski. Share. Ping back, will there ever be a rainbow? Dead Homer. One, what is Zombie Simpsons? Don't be a sap, Dad. These are just crappy knockoffs. Bart Simpson, pfft. I know a genuine Panaphonics when I see it. And look, there's Magnetbox and Sorny. Homer Simpson. Zombie Simpsons is a show on the Fox network that's been airing on Sundays at 8 p.m. since roughly the year 2000. Like most half-hour comedy shows, it has its ups and downs, but it's usually blandly forgettable. Its viewership has been steadily declining for years, but new episodes still routinely draw between 5 and 8 million viewers. It grinds out a steady profit one commercial break at a time, directly and indirectly employing a few hundred people, most of whom are neither rich nor famous. In all but one respect it is a middling, unexceptional television show, and there's nothing wrong with that. It is the sacred right of everyone to veg out in front of a screen. On American television at any given time there are scripted and unscripted dramas and comedies, political gossip programs, science shows, pathetically fraudulent docodramas, movies, travel narratives, and game shows that pay varying levels of money for varying levels of contestant humiliation. These almost uncountable offerings are geared to appeal to every conceivable niche and demographic, and Zombie Simpsons has carved out its own cozy corner among them. The only thing that makes Zombie Simpsons exceptional is its illustrious predecessor, The Simpsons. That show is arguably the most renowned and celebrated program to ever grace the airwaves. No other television program in history can match its levels of critical adoration, popular acclaim, global reach, longevity, and cultural impact. And, given the increasingly segmented and fractured media environment of the 21st century, it is difficult to conceive of something in the future even coming close. Zombie Simpsons is just another television show. The Simpsons was unique. To be sure, Zombie Simpsons does bear a cosmetic resemblance to The Simpsons. After all, the two shows share a great deal of their casts, as well as a few writers, producers, directors, and artists. Even the surface similarities are fading with time, though. The fluid and vibrant hand-drawn animation has been replaced by militarily rigid computer templates. The exquisitely talented cast members can't resist a quarter-century of wear and tear on their vocal cords, and many characters now sound only vaguely like they once did. Things have changed even more beneath the surface. The two have polar opposite senses of humor. The Simpsons trafficked in tightly plotted stories that were cynical, anti-authority social satires that often bordered on nihilism. They managed to get away with it thanks to a clever veneer of sweetness and slapstick. Zombie Simpsons reverses those priorities. It leans heavily on sweetness and slapstick, leaves plot threads all over the place, and only rarely musters even a fraction of the hilariously bleak cynicism that was a big part of what made The Simpsons what it was. Broadly speaking then, Zombie Simpsons is the regular television show that remained when The Simpsons stopped being The Simpsons. There is much argument among fans over when precisely the change took place, but there is wide consensus that such a change has indeed occurred. As for what's left, some people still like to watch it, most others don't, including some of its original creators. After conducting dozens of interviews with Simpsons veterans for his oral history of the show, John Orth reported that few of them bother to watch the new episodes. They aren't alone. The ratings have plummeted from where they were in the 1990s, even accounting for the general decline in network viewership. Despite the fact that Fox was only available in about 80% of households during the show's early years, The Simpsons was twice in the top 30 of all television shows, 1989 to 90 and 1992 to 93. Fox wouldn't put another show on that rarefied list until The X-Files in 1996-97.2. By contrast, Zombie Simpsons can't crack the top 50 on a Fox network that is fully established. New episodes routinely break the record for the least viewed in the show's history. Popular apathy persists after the original broadcasts and into the home video market. Seasons 1 to 14 and Season 20 have so far been released on DVD, and all of them are available on Amazon.com. The average customer reviews tell the tale. 3. Note 1, the dip in the ratings for Season 6 is wholly attributable to a new kind of DVD packaging Fox used. Seasons 1 to 5 came in sturdy, fold-out cardboard boxes. Season 6 came in a plastic bin shaped like Homer's head, and the DVDs were held in flimsy panels. Customers were outraged at the shoddy packaging, and the reviews reflect that. There are a number of one-star reviews that say the box is terrible while still praising the episodes as some of the greatest ever. After the outcry, Fox began releasing them with both a standard box and with the collector's head boxes. Note 2, Season 20, which broadcast some episodes in high definition, was rushed out on a bare-bones Blu-ray/DVD to capitalize on the new format. The lack of extra features figures in many of the reviews. Though subsequent seasons have been entirely in HD, no similar releases have been made. The little ups and downs aren't important here, especially in later seasons when the lack of interest results in much smaller sample sizes. Season 14, for example, has 4.1 stars, but on only 31 reviews, compared to an average of 237 reviews for Seasons 1 to 10. What is clear and unambiguous is that the show had a long plateau of nearly perfect reviews that came to an end around Season 9. In the eyes of people who are willing to spend money to watch the episodes whenever they want, the show has never recovered, nor shown any signs of doing so. Almost the exact same pattern can be seen among a different set of fans, registered users of IMDb.com. The internet's premier source for basic facts about movies and television, IMDb allows its members to vote on how much they like or loathe every episode of a television show. The ratings are done on a scale of 1 to 10, though, like many internet ratings, only a small portion of the scale is ever used. 1. The chart below is their average rating for the episodes of each season of 4. Despite different user groups, different levels of involvement, and different voting structures, the decline in IMDb's estimation of the show closely tracks the Amazon rankings. There's an early plateau that begins tapering off in Seasons 8 to 9 and crashes after Season 10. According to the IMDb users, no double-digit season rates higher than any single-digit season. Even Season 1, when the show was still finding its footing, outranks everything from Season 10 and after. That general opinion is prevalent among the most involved fans as well. In February of 2012, users at the No Homers Club, far and away the most active Simpsons discussion website, voted on a collective top 100 episodes list. Of the 100 they chose as the best, 98 were from Season 9 or earlier. The only exceptions were Season 12's Trilogy of Error at number 54, and Season 19's Eternal Moonshine of the Spotless Mind at number 91. A few months before that, they held a similar vote for the bottom 50. 48 of those episodes were from Season 10 or later, and the 2 episodes selected from the single-digit seasons were both clip shows. Nor is the belief that the show has noticeably declined limited to its fans. Outside of press releases and the occasional adversarial interview, even people associated with the production will admit that Zombie Simpsons isn't what The Simpsons was. In 2009, as a promo for Season 20, Fox released a YouTube video of Grandpa Simpson's best rambling nonsense about American history. As the Battle Hymn of the Republic and other favorites play lightly in the background, Grandpa confidently states that the Wright brothers won the Civil War and that Sarah Bernhardt was the president in 1906. The video goes on for over 2 minutes with clips from 9 episodes. All of them are from Season 9 or earlier. To celebrate the show's 20th anniversary, Fox commissioned documentarian Morgan Spurlock, of Super Size Me fame, to create an hour-long special. Spurlock's mini-movie covered both the history of The Simpsons and some of its most memorable moments. He interspersed interviews and trivia with numerous clips from the show. Tellingly, almost all of the clips were from the early years, with those from seasons 1 to 10 outnumbering the rest by a ratio of nearly 10 to 1.8. Pressed to come up with clips that put the show in the best possible light, Spurlock rarely grabbed anything broadcast after 1999. Nor is Spurlock the only outsider who's worked with the show to notice its decline. Harvey Fierstein played Homer's gay assistant Carl in Season 2's Samson and Delilah. He was invited to reprise the role in Season 14's Three Gays of the Condo, but rejected the offer in '9. Basically, Homer just had a lot of fun hanging out with gay men, and drinking in bars, and dancing at discos, and all that, and there was no commentary there. Every restaurant had a silly gay name. The gym had a silly gay name. They were all double entendres, obviously. And I said, anybody could do this. You're the fucking Simpsons. Do something we have never seen before? And let me say that it was very flattering that they asked me to do it. Jim Brooks said, you're the very first voice we ever asked to come back and do it again. I was surprised. I asked, why do they need me to introduce them to this gay couple? Why wouldn't he move in with Carl and his partner? Then I started thinking, maybe, they just wanted my stamp of approval on it because it was just a bunch of cliches. Despite the fact that there was a lot more leeway for televising gay characters in 2003 than there had been in 1990, the jokes and ideas had actually gotten worse. Even people who work on Zombie Simpsons will occasionally acknowledge its descent. Mike Rice, a member of the original writing staff, co-showrunner for Seasons 3 and 4, and a man who still consults on modern episodes, spoke to a group of college students in New York City in 2010. When asked about the declining quality of the show, Rice gave a telling response: The Simpsons change the way people change. Think of your grandparents. They either get boring or crazy and weird. I like to think The Simpsons has gotten crazy and weird. Comparing the show to a senile old person, especially given the show's history of mocking senile old people, too, is hardly a ringing endorsement. But it's telling that even someone as inside as Rice admits that the show has become something very different than it once was. The voice actors have occasionally expressed the same sentiment. During contract negotiations in 2004, Harry Shearer, the man behind such iconic voices as Ned Flanders and Mr. Burns, said of the show, I rate the last 3 seasons as among the worst, so Season 4 looks very good to me now. In 2011, Hank Azaria, who voices characters like Chief Wiggum, Moe and Comic Book Guy, told Vulture, the cultural blog of New York Magazine, that while he used to do new voices for almost every episode, since Season 10 it's more like 1 or 2 new voices every season and that he's got nothing left. 11. Even people who've defended Zombie Simpsons against the persistent charges of mediocrity have been known to slip up and cop to the fact that the program isn't what it used to be. Late in the Spurlock special, in a segment specially designated to rebut the show's many critics, Dana Gould, who first wrote for the show in Season 12, came on and said, The people who say it was never as good as it was 5 years ago, it's like, well, neither are you, that's the problem. A year later, speaking with a website of the Denver Post about another project, Gould went back on that, saying of Season 4, that to me was the show's early zenith where it just cranked on all cylinders. 12 Gould was only on staff during Zombie Simpsons years, and even he thinks that the show he worked on wasn't the same as the one that conquered the world. The idea that Zombie Simpsons is as good as The Simpsons is a kind of Soviet fiction. The words are mouthed dutifully in publicity interviews and scrupulously recited in press releases and official communiques, but when the Klieg lights turn off, everybody will admit that it's a front. Still, there are literally millions of people who enjoy Zombie Simpsons. They laugh at it and come back for more 20-odd Sundays every year, and that's just fine. Different people enjoy different things, they always have and they always will. But there's no denying that the show being broadcast today isn't the same. Whether you're going by audience opinion, Nielsen ratings, or even the words of people who've worked there, the distinction between the two is clear and undeniable. You can call it Zombie Simpsons 3, or you can call it something else, but it isn't The Simpsons. Continue to Chapter 2, The Terrible World of 1980s Television. Notes and Sources. 1. This is commonly referred to as the 7 to 9 scale. You can read all about it here, http://tvtropes.org/pmwiki/pmwiki.php/main/4-point scale. 2. The sign outside the Springfield retirement castle reads, "Thank you for not discussing the outside world." 3. See Appendix A. I. Ort. John. The Simpsons. Two, The Terrible World of 1980s Television. Bart, how many hours a day do you watch TV? Marge Simpson 6. 7 if there's something good on. Bart Simpson. The broad outlines of the history of The Simpsons are probably already familiar to anyone reading this. But just in case, the basic story is that James L. Brooks heard about Matt Groening's life in hell comic strip and wanted to use it as crudely drawn filler material on the Tracy Ullman Show. Groening didn't want to give up ownership of his rabbit characters, so he whipped up a generic family based on his own. The shorts were funny enough that the 3-year-old Fox network took a chance and ordered 13 half-hour episodes. Brooks hired veteran television writer Sam Simon to flesh out the characters and create a writing staff for what would become the first successful animated network show in primetime since the Flintstones went off the air in 1966. For the full-length episodes premiered with a Christmas special on December 19, 1989, and have been airing ever since. Two, The Terrible World of 1980s Television. Bart, how many hours a day do you watch TV? Marge Simpson 6. 7 if there's something good on. Bart Simpson. The broad outlines of the history of The Simpsons are probably already familiar to anyone reading this. But just in case, the basic story is that James L. Brooks heard about Matt Groening's life in hell comic strip and wanted to use it as crudely drawn filler material on the Tracy Ullman Show. Groening didn't want to give up ownership of his rabbit characters, so he whipped up a generic family based on his own. The shorts were funny enough that the 3-year-old Fox network took a chance and ordered 13 half-hour episodes. Brooks hired veteran television writer Sam Simon to flesh out the characters and create a writing staff for what would become the first successful animated network show in primetime since the Flintstones went off the air in 1966. For the full-length episodes premiered with a Christmas special on December 19, 1989, and have been airing ever since. Some version of that very basic historical outline has become boilerplate for pretty much anything written about The Simpsons. While it's true as far as broad outlines go, that stuff about Fox and the Flintstones is often the only piece of context given, and that leaves out a huge part of the story. Yes, Fox was the first new network in forever, and yes, The Simpsons was the first evening cartoon in decades, but beyond those tidbits, the late 1980s was a very peculiar moment in the evolution of television. Most American industries, everything from oil and airplanes to cars and computers, began with a vast collection of wildcat operators, a few of whom eventually became big, established companies. Movies and radio started much the same way. In their early years, anyone could get into the business and the hand of censorship was light to non-existent. Television never had that freewheeling infancy. From the time it became widely available in the 1950s and right up to today, television has always been the product of established companies with existing rules and regulations. The radio networks, decades old and amply stocked with coiffed men in tailored suits, simply took their buttoned-down broadcasting philosophy and applied it to the new medium. For its first 3 decades, the culture of television was staid and unchanging. Through 30 years of social changes and technical improvements, the 3 networks pumped out fare that was mostly remarkable for its consistency. Certain types of shows would become trendy or fall out of favor, hemlines went up and down, and new stars would emerge and fade, but the airwaves were always dominated by action, mystery and detective shows, soap operas, variety hours, and the ubiquitous family comedies. By the mid-1980s, American television was beginning to transition from the stuffy, centralized and highly censored world of 3 networks to the hundreds of channels that exist today, but it hadn't happened yet. A person from 1955 could switch on a television in 1985 and be instantly at home. Even some of the same players were still around. Andy Griffith, star of Simpsons' punching bag Matlock, had debuted on television during the Eisenhower administration and was still one of its biggest stars under Reagan. 5. When the Fox network began in 1986, cable television was still unavailable in most U.S. households, and the tiny handful of cable channels that did exist mostly ran niche programming, old movies, or reruns of network shows. Scripted original programming on cable was almost unheard of. With the exception of a few syndicated programs, all freshly written shows had to pass through one of the big 3, and the networks had very definite ideas about what kind of programming they wanted from their entertainment divisions. There were the dramas, which were mostly detective and cop shows that always ended with righteous American justice. Whether you were watching Clever Old People on Murder, She Wrote, 1984 to 1996, or Matlock, 1986 to 1995, or Handsome Rogues Who Played by Their Own Rules on Hunter, 1984 to 1991, or The Equalizer, 1985 to 1989, you could be sure that there was a mystery to be solved and a fiend to be apprehended before the hour was up. The networks leavened those with Milbrow soap operas like Dallas, 1978 to 1991, Dynasty, 1981 to 1989, and Knots Landing, 1979 to 1993, as well as the occasional lawyer show or tearjerker, like LA Law, 1986 to 1994, or Highway to Heaven, 1984 to 1989. Comedy was straitjacketed in a similar way. With a few rare and short-lived exceptions, there were 2 kinds of comedies, workplace and family. The workplace comedy allowed a bunch of wacky characters to spit one-liners at each other and usually came complete with male and female leads who seemed perfect for one another but never quite got together. The family comedy, far more prevalent than its workplace brethren, was an even less creative template and was easily identified by the presence of adorable child actors. Around them would be 1 or more adults, often but not always a husband and wife, who had to put up with the precocious antics of the little Moppets. The networks regarded slight changes to the backstories of these characters, he's divorced, they're adopted, as all the variety the American public desired. Atop the pile sat The Cosby Show. Premiering in 1984, it was an instant hit and would be the #1 rated program of any kind for 5 straight years, from the 1985 to 86 season through the 1989 to 90 season. It was unusual in that it had a black cast, but it was the archetype for a family sitcom: the wise but funny father, the supportive wife, the precocious kids. Each episode followed 1 or 2 family members through some little event or crisis, and lessons both small and large were doled out regularly. The Cosby Show was wildly popular for a reason: it executed the family sitcom formula better than any other program. The stories were moralizing but plausible, the laughs were genuine, and the cast was solid from top to bottom. Though he's become less universally beloved in his later years, Bill Cosby is undeniably one of the most talented comedians ever to grace the American stage, and he carried the show that bore his name with his finely honed brand of clean-cut whimsy. Unfortunately, most family sitcoms didn't have anyone nearly as capable as Cosby on hand. Even the ones that were hits weren't as supple at playing within the formula as his. Most of them involved making a slight tweak to the basic nuclear family and then plowing ahead with lame jokes and lots of laugh track. The hook on Family Ties, 1982 to 1989, was that liberal parents had conservative kids. Growing Pains, 1985 to 1992, involved a husband who worked from home, a wife who worked in an office, and their 3, eventually 4, lesson-needing children. There were 2 different versions of Tough Guy Stays Home to Mind the Kids in Who's the Boss? 1984 to 1992, and Charles in Charge, 1984 to 1990. The basic setup was so predictably durable that NBC managed to create a modest hit by inserting a wisecracking alien into an otherwise anodyne situation in Elf, 1986 to 1990. Generally speaking, each network ran 3 hours of primetime programming from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and 4 hours from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. on Sunday. The 10 p.m. slot was typically occupied by detective shows or soap operas, and the 7 p.m. Sunday slot was reserved for public affairs programs, which meant that half-hour comedies almost always ran between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. That's 84 potential shows 6, and while not every network broadcast comedy every night, it was a lot of airtime to fill. Family sitcoms were the bricks and mortar of the network television house. By the mid-1980s, ABC, CBS, and NBC were debuting, continuing, or canceling an average of nearly 30 family sitcoms each year. Some of these shows were more creative and popular than others, but most of them premiered to low ratings and were swiftly forgotten. Many of them died such quick deaths that today all that's left of them are a few dutiful pages on IMDb and Wikipedia. A particular lowlight came in the middle of the 1987-88 season when ABC premiered and then instantly canceled a show called Family Man. On top of its superlatively generic title, a year and a half later CBS debuted a different show with the same one, adding only the "Do Family Man" may have represented the nadir of creativity in 1980s Hollywood. Not only was the setup as formulaic as possible, husband, wife, 3 kids, but the titular father was a television writer. The networks copied and recopied the same premises year after year until the airwaves were filled with just a few kinds of shows, only a handful of which could even remotely be considered quality programming. If you wanted to watch a detective show, a cop show, or a detective show about an ex-cop, you were in luck. There were so many shows about ex-cop detectives that CBS had to resort to time travel to come up with a fresh twist, trying out a show about a sheriff from the 1800s who goes to 1986 and opens a detective agency. Similarly, if you wanted to watch a family sitcom with caring parents and cute children, you could do so 7 days a week. If you wanted to watch something outside of those narrow confines, however, you were most likely out of luck. There were a few exceptions, but the majority of the new shows were rigidly similar to the ones that were already on. 1 or 2 would take off each year while the rest died quickly, and that was called television. This stultified medium of bland, repetitive mediocrity was the stage onto which The Simpsons exploded. Continue to Chapter 3, the most anti-authority show ever. Notes and sources. For Hanna-Barbera, creators of the Flintstones, produced a short-lived animated sitcom, complete with canned laughter, called Wait Till Your Father Gets Home in the early 1970s, but it ran in syndication and wasn't an official network show. 5. For a brief but informative account, see Tim Brooks' A Short History of Network Television in the introductory pages, X21, of the Complete Directory to Primetime Network and Cable TV Shows. 6. For half-hour time slots, X 7 days a week equals 28 shows, X 3 networks equals 84 shows. Tell Aronson and Zykowski. Share. Jeff on August 18, 2012 at 11:07 p.m. I appreciate your calling the Equalizer handsome. The most anti-authority show ever. I'm Bart Simpson. Who the hell are you? Bart Simpson. I'm Dave Shutton. I'm an investigative reporter who's on the road a lot, and I must say that in my day we didn't talk that way to our elders. Dave Shutton. Well, this is my day, and we do, sir. Bart Simpson. The Simpsons premiered just 2 weeks before the 1980s ended, instantly going beyond hit show and becoming a cultural sensation. 1990 was the year of Bart Mania, famously epitomized by t-shirts emblazoned with a picture of Bart underneath the word underachiever, slingshot in hand, he declared, and proud of it, man. The huge reaction to the show, both positive and negative, was greatly abetted by all those years of timidity and repetitiveness on the part of the 3 major networks. The revolt had begun with shows like Married, with Children and Roseanne, both of which took as a given a working class, explicitly anti-Cosby mentality. 7 But while those shows had the attitude, they were inherently limited by their laugh-tracked, live-action, living room with a couch setup. The Simpsons had no such restrictions, and cast its scorn over everything. The reaction was as intense as it was polarized. For Americans who more or less liked television and America the way they were, The Simpsons represented a near blasphemous rejection of things they held dear. For Americans who felt ignored on television and in general, The Simpsons was a perfect send-up of everything they'd been told to love, but actually hated. Both groups had been inured to dumb and inoffensive programming, and something that was neither came as a shock. The people who loathed the show, up to and including the sitting president and first lady, had become accustomed to a television landscape that was rife with families that looked like them and messages that confirmed their beliefs. The Simpsons, especially Bart, enraged them for not conforming to the usual television morality. That it was animated made it even worse. Cartoons were considered children's programming and, in a classic case of the think of the children mentality The Simpsons would skewer later that year, Bart and Homer were derided as terrible role models who would surely lead America's youth astray. The people who loved the show had the opposite reaction, but for the same reasons. They too were desensitized to the repetitive blandness of most television, but they embraced The Simpsons wholeheartedly. Suburban white kids, city black kids, and every non-stereotypical demographic in between tuned in every week. Soon even the repeats were scoring big ratings, merchandise of various legality was consumed in a frenzy, and Bart became the literal poster boy for what was wrong with America. The hysteria was due at least in part to the way The Simpsons deliberately attacked the sacred cows of American television. Unlike all those shows where things always work out and kids learn lessons, in Springfield there isn't a single institution that's run by an honest and caring public servant. The local government is presided over by a corrupt womanizer modeled on the worst aspects of the Kennedys. The police force is staffed by morons and commanded by a man whose incompetence is matched only by his corpulence. The school is run by a principal who is ramrod straight in public but who doesn't particularly care that most of the kids in his charge aren't going anywhere in life. Likewise, the teachers and the staff go through the motions but are contemptuous and comprehensively apathetic toward the children they are theoretically educating. Generations of television shows had treated these institutions with deference and respect. The Simpsons mocked them harshly and relentlessly. The mayor's adultery wasn't a scandal, it was taken for granted. The same was true of the indifference of the teachers and the incompetence of the police. There weren't any crusading journalists or hero cops. There weren't any reforming politicians, caring teachers, or righteous lawyers who locked away the guilty and kept the innocent from prison. Every person with authority or responsibility was resigned to the crappiness of the system. Authority figures like these weren't usually mocked on television, and when they were, it was only in the gentlest of ways. Think Don Knotts on The Andy Griffith Show. The Simpsons didn't merely disrespect them, it was outright contemptuous of them. Season 1 mocked the police, the schools, the government, and the churches, all while portraying their leaders as wretched human beings. There were gullible school administrators, quack therapists, dim-witted preachers, and a justice system so poorly run that its mistakes could be spotted by a 10-year-old. The show took as its axiom an America that sucked and failed not because of laziness or moral collapse, but because it was run and inhabited by idiots and assholes. Above all, the show went after the holiest of television holies, the TV dad. The first episode shown, Simpsons roasting on an open fire, is a half hour of total patriarchal failure. Homer Simpson is incompetent, stupid, and insecure. He does everything in his limited power to give his family the kind of Christmas that television families have long enjoyed, but tinsel and trimmings are simply beyond his reach. Though things end on a happy note when Homer brings home an abandoned racing dog, even that is the result of his failures. His family falls in love with the dog, but Homer doesn't realize he's saved Christmas until after it happens. He doesn't take in the dog because his family will love him for it, he takes in the dog because he recognizes a kindred spirit in the serially defeated Pooch, saying of Santa's little helper he's pathetic. He's a loser. He's a Simpson. Unlike countless other Christmas heroes, Homer is just smart enough to know that he's a failure, but far too dumb to do anything about it. The fourth episode broadcast, There's No Disgrace Like Home, began, as uncountable numbers of family sitcoms have, with two siblings having an argument. Bart and Lisa, becoming increasingly heated, repeatedly shout "oh, yeah," and "yeah," at each other. Homer, playing the part of every television dad from Ward Cleaver on down, rushes in to break it up. Homer, hey, what's the problem here? Lisa, we were fighting over which one of us loves you more. Homer is moved by this, and gets a little teary-eyed at the idea that his kids love him so much that they're actually arguing over it. Touched, he lets them continue. Homer, you were? Ah, well, go ahead. Bart, you love him more. Lisa, no, you do. Bart, no, I don't. Lisa, yes, you do. Bart, no, I don't. This open loathing of traditional authority wasn't completely unprecedented. Married with Children had been on for 3 years at that point. But Married with Children was a live-action show with scantily clad women, raunchy jokes, and obnoxious hooting. It was clearly adult entertainment. The Simpsons looked like something you could safely put your kid in front of, but it directly attacked the assumptions that undergirded most of television since its beginnings. Going all the way back to the besuited patriarchs of the 1950s, TV dads existed to give advice and personify Boy Scout notions of American manhood. They robotically set good examples, dealt honestly and forthrightly with everyone, and dispensed wise counsel each time their kids didn't quite measure up. Though it was tweaked many times, the formula of a child character getting a little out of hand before being gently corrected was a durable staple of American sitcoms. The very first episode of baby boomer classic Leave It to Beaver was about an all-American kid who got advice from his TV dad about the importance of telling the truth. The Simpsons would have none of that. Consider a landmark exchange in The Telltale Head, broadcast in February of 1990. Bart, Dad, can I talk to you about something? Homer, sure, boy, what's on your mind? Bart, well, I was wondering, how important is it to be popular? This is a classic setup, the son asking the father for advice and hopping up on the old man's knee to receive the official wisdom. On top of that, it's the popularity question, one of the issues of middle-class childhood. Whether in a sitcom, a movie, or an after-school special, every parent, teacher and adult knows the answer to the popularity question is to say that popularity isn't everything, that you should be yourself no matter what. Just as consistently, every kid watching, popular and not, knows that answer is bullshit. The brutal social environments of the playground and cafeteria make that clear every day. Just as they rejected so much television convention, The Simpsons rejected the usual answer. Homer, I'm glad you asked, son. Being popular is the most important thing in the world. Bart, so, sometimes you could do stuff that you think is pretty bad so other kids will like you better? Homer, you're not talking about killing anyone, are you? Bart, no. Homer, are you? Bart, no. Homer, then run along you little scamp. That exchange was genuinely subversive. Here, at long last, was a show not only refusing to toe the official line, but willing to go in the other direction, to admit the unpleasant truth and then make it funny. The episode doesn't end with Bart learning a lesson about popularity, nor do he and Homer hug. It ends with them defending themselves from a murderous mob that includes Bart's teacher and principal, Homer's boss, and the local reverend. There's no schmaltz and no character growth, and if there is a message, it is only that laughing is all you can do. The show made its bones striking against the smiles and sunshine of regular television. Finding itself in virgin territory, it hit every target that had long been shielded behind unofficial taboos and the official sentimentality of very special episodes. 8 In just the first season, Homer contemplates suicide, Marge considers cheating on him, and the whole town is portrayed as a mess. Bart and Lisa whack their babysitter over the head with a baseball bat and hog-tie her. The beloved television clown is revealed to be a gambling, chain-smoking illiterate. Bart even gets rewarded for cheating on a test, an act which would have almost certainly resulted in moralizing and hugging on any other program. People in positions of authority, be they teachers, principals, police officers, politicians or parents, were ridiculed at every turn. This was a show that was willing to admit that life could suck, and as the series came into its own in season 2, the list of targets expanded to virtually every cherished notion American television had long protected, including the June Cleaver TV moms who had previously been on a pedestal 30 years high. Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, first aired in December of 1990, is the kind of attack in all directions satire that made The Simpsons what it was. Previously untouchable moral guideposts like Helen Lovejoy and Maud Flanders were held up as authoritarian hypocrites. But their enemies, the profit-at-all-costs entertainment industry people, got it just as bad. Studio heads and their employees were shown as nothing more than remorseless, uncaring hacks that saw children as walking dollar signs. Along the way, the episode does everything from referencing Alfred Hitchcock to mocking Nightline and fine art. Nothing is spared and no one comes out unscathed. Throughout its run, The Simpsons was relentless and uncompromising in its depiction of America as a dumpy, half-broken place that got along on apathy and greed and little else. The local news anchor is an airhead, the nuclear plant is a breeding ground for mutants, no part of the government works, and the old people who remember a better time are senile codgers who are probably deluding themselves. As if that weren't affront enough, it was a cartoon that seemed to be deliberately aimed at America's kids. You can ask Socrates about what societies do to people who attempt to corrupt the youth, and that was something in which The Simpsons reveled. When questioned on that, the people behind the show always pointed out that this was a program where the family routinely went to church, and so what if they hated going? Don't you? The family on their show stuck together no matter what, so what if they didn't like each other? Plenty of people have a jerk for a father and siblings they loathe. On The Cosby Show, Leave It to Beaver, and every other family sitcom, the world was only occasionally unpleasant, and temporarily at that. By the time the credits rolled, everyone and everything was back to their pleasant defaults. The Simpsons painted a very different picture of contemporary life, one where the basic assumption was the opposite of domestic bliss. The Simpson family didn't bond by overcoming issues or learning lessons, they bonded over being so dysfunctional that the therapist paid them double their money just to go away. Simpsons was a show about characters with yellow skin, giant eyes, and no chins, but it lived in a world that was far more recognizable than the one television usually portrayed. It didn't assume happy outcomes or happy families. It didn't pretend that the world was just. It certainly didn't think the people in charge deserved any respect. It rejected the strain of authority that ran through other shows, and for that it was hated and loved. Continue to Chapter 4, You're watching Fox, shame on you. Notes and sources. 7. According to lore, this is literally true in the case of Married, with Children, whose working title is supposed to have been Not the Cosbys. 8. A particularly vile strain of schlock that will be discussed further in Chapter 7. Tell Aronson and Zykowski. Share. Josh on May 19, 2012 at 6:53 p.m. Your article gives the show so much context. I always loved the first season of The Simpsons, and this article gives great insight to why it was such a big deal at the time. For, You're watching Fox, shame on you. Oh, the network slogan is true, watch Fox and be damned for all eternity. Ned Flanders. The Simpsons openly rebelled against the staid world of television and remorselessly mocked American society. Even in the 1980s, neither of those were novel concepts. But unlike counterculture publications, 9 risque niche programming, and art house movies that trafficked in the same sentiment, The Simpsons was beamed directly into the vast majority of American homes. Marge and Homer were just as available in Kansas as they were in New York. That is a distinction that has become less important in the days of satellite television, DVDs, broadband internet, and smartphones, but it was vital at the time. The influence the 3 television networks exerted over American culture is hard to comprehend today. Americans see only a handful of movies per year and read even fewer books. But that same mythically average American watches hours of television every day. For the overwhelming majority of people, the Chattering Cyclops was their cultural keystone, and it was dominated by just 3 organizations. By the 1980s, ABC, CBS, and NBC had been synonymous with television for so long that they seemed like something out of the Old Testament. Point 10. In 1986, Fox conducted research to determine what kind of programming people would want from a hypothetical 4th network. They unearthed an enormous amount of frustration. 13. What we found was a tremendous vacuum. Essentially, every viewer had a problem with every network. They would say things like, they canceled my favorite show, or their shows are all the same, or they only do one show that's a hit and then everybody copies that. There was a very strong theme of very repetitive complaints about the 3 networks. Fox aimed to fill that vacuum, and by the time The Simpsons premiered in 1989, it had achieved modest success with shows like 21 Jump Street and Married, with Children, programs that had no counterparts on the established networks. But it was still just a proto-network, a few Aaron stations, some UHF affiliates, and the long-shattered remains of the Dumont Television Network, which had gone dark in 1956. It only programmed a couple of hours per night, had no news division, and wasn't even on 7 days a week until 1993. Whatever Fox lacked in respect and prestige, however, it made up for in sheer reach. Starting in 1987, a decade before small dish satellite services went mainstream and 2 decades before home video streaming became practical, Fox was the only thing that could be seen by even a significant fraction of the audience for ABC, CBS, and NBC. It didn't have the total coast-to-coast coverage they did, but it was head and shoulders above everything else. Nor did Fox lack for marketing panache. Like most News Corp subsidiaries before and since, the network was a tireless self-promoter, and to solidify its outsider cool, Fox more or less openly flew the Jolly Roger. In its early years. 11 It billed itself as the new kid, edgy, unrepentant, and modern. It featured a lot of minority programming, was looser with lower-key swear words, and had a more casual attitude towards attractive people in skimpy clothing. Fox may have been owned by a billionaire plutocrat and run by a bunch of multi-millionaire television veterans, but compared to the ancient power of the established networks, it could credibly present itself as anti-establishment. Fox has since become synonymous with the American right thanks to Fox News and 24, but in the late 1980s it looked like a lefty plot to a lot of people. A year into its run, Married with Children had been the subject of a public boycott when a Michigan woman took offense to an episode, which was the basis for the previously discussed Season 2 episode, Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. Arsenio Hall got his start on Fox, which didn't help the network's reputation among the doyens of television when he began threatening Johnny Carson's long-standing and universally lauded run of late-night dominance. Thanks to those kinds of disruptions, and the fact that it relentlessly described itself as such, Fox was cool, controversial and growing. The Simpsons and Fox both launched at the perfect moment. Network television's power as a cultural arbiter was at its peak, technology hadn't yet begun diluting its audience with competitors, and the existing players were all stodgy and old-fashioned. A few years earlier in Fox might not have been big enough to make the show truly catch, a few years later in Springfield might have been just another part of the fourth network. But on Fox in the 1989-90 season, The Simpsons was in a unique position in terms of availability, cultural cash, and controversy. It wasn't for nothing that Fox advertised the premiere by saying, "They're coming to save the 90s." 14. It was the right show, on the right network, at the right time. With hundreds of channels, instant video, and the ever-expanding internet, there will likely never be another confluence like that. Continue to Chapter 5, The Retirements. Notes and sources. 9. Matt Groening's Life in Hell cartoons got their start in alternative weeklies. 10. ABC was the youngest of the three, and even it had been a full-fledged network for 2 decades at that point. 11. In the United Kingdom, the Sky One channel was getting started at the same time. Like Fox, Sky One was a News Corporation property and it used The Simpsons to establish five. The Retirements. The writers should be ashamed of themselves. Lisa Simpson cartoons have writers? The writers should be ashamed of ashamed. Menu. 5. The Retirements. The writers should be ashamed of themselves. Lisa Simpson cartoons have writers? Bart Simpson and, sort of. Lisa Simpson. The Simpsons ran its unprecedented and unequaled course in the 1990s. The show found the tender underbelly of American culture, pulled no punches, and used its tremendous media platform to make sure everyone saw the body blows. It mocked everything: religion and politics, unions and corporations, marriage and children, you name it. Even subjects not usually considered much for comedy, the space program, child abuse, feminism, were the subject of merciless satire. It made headlines regularly for doing everything from defaming New Orleans to becoming a part of one of Bush the Elder's 1992 re-election stump speeches. 12. a tiny handful of television shows can stir that much shit, but The Simpsons had an ace in the hole that made it elite even among the select few that caused that kind of trouble. Unlike most programs, The Simpsons never suffered because of interference from above. On pretty much every show on television, know-nothing executives, many of whom have as much useful experience in broadcasting as they do in deep-sea exploration, are allowed to change plots, object to jokes, and generally make themselves feel important at the expense of the program. Point 13 The Simpsons never had to deal with that. As part of the original contract, drawn up when Fox was still a fly-by-night operation, The Simpsons had total immunity from network interference. The only people who were allowed to decide what happens in Springfield were the ones in the writer's room. That freedom allowed the show to become what it was, but it also concentrated enormous responsibility on the ever-changing writing staff. Whatever they came up with was what got animated and ended up on screens all over the world. So while the protection from management interference gave the show unprecedented creative freedom, it also meant that any disruptions among the writing staff would have enormous effects on the quality of the show. For good and ill, The Simpsons was entirely its own creation. Understanding how the writers worked has been the subject of much speculation, conjecture and reporting over the years, but the basic outline is well established. The Simpsons is headed by a showrunner, which is sometimes a single person and sometimes a pair of people. The showrunner's job is to pick which ideas get turned into scripts, dole out writing assignments, and manage the group rewriting of each episode. In short, the showrunner is indeed running the show. The Simpsons went through 4 different showrunners during its first 8 seasons. The first 2 seasons were run by Sam Simon, a longtime television writer who assembled the original writing staff. Seasons 3 and 4 were jointly run by Alabama Gene and Mike Rice, who were among Simon's first hires. 14 Seasons 5 and 6 were run by David Merkin, who was brought in when Simon's original staff began to depart, and Seasons 7 and 8 were run by Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who came aboard in Season 3.15. Those 8 seasons were one of the best rides in television history, but that kind of thing can't last. The show's sustained excellence not only required extraordinary effort and talent, but a grueling, year-long production schedule as well. Working on The Simpsons demanded enormous hours and kept everyone extremely busy, often into the wee hours of the morning. People can only produce that kind of work under those kinds of conditions for so long, which is one of the reasons why no showrunner, or even pair of showrunners, lasted more than 2 seasons. The original Season 1 writing assignments are credited to just a few guys: Sam Simon, Al Jean, Mike Rice, Jake Hogan, Wallace Wolodarski, George Meyer, John Vitti, and John Swartzwelder. 16 As the show took off, 2 more regular writers were added for Season 2, Jeff Martin, who was credited with many of the show's famous songs, and David M. Stern. With plenty of help from outside writers who penned the occasional episode, that core of guys wrote the first 3 seasons of The Simpsons and created all but a couple of the secondary characters that have given the show such breadth. Starting at the end of Season 3 and moving into Season 4, the writing staff got more fresh blood in the form of Bill Oakley, Josh Weinstein, Conan O'Brien, Frank Mula, and Dan McGrath. But Season 4 also saw the first significant departures. After 4 years, Simon and many of the people he'd hired were burned up, pissed off, or simply wanted out. 17 Kogan, Wolodarski and Stern's names stop appearing in the credits in the middle of Season 4. John Vitti and Jeff Martin departed at the end of that same year. That was the first big change in the writing staff, but the show itself didn't skip a beat. Several of the replacement writers had already been with the show for a season, and the overall staff still had a strong and experienced core. David Merkin, the new showrunner for Season 5, built around that core and expanded the staff significantly. Remarkably, several of the people he brought on board, notably David S. Cohen and Greg Daniels, were writers on their way to the top of the television world. In terms of people who would later go on to huge success at other programs, the show peaked during Merkin's tenure in Seasons 5 and 6. But all good things must come to an end, and that includes the writing staff of The Simpsons. When Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein took over from David Merkin at the start of Season 7, they had plenty of Merkin veterans, but they were among the last links to the early days of the show. Besides the 2 of them, the only other pre-Merkin veterans were the 4 horsemen of Season 1, Al Jean, Mike Rice, George Meyer, and John Swartzwelder. There are 12 other writers listed in the credits for Season 7, which means that less than a third of the staff had been around prior to Season 5. Al Jean and Mike Rice left after Season 7, as did future television comedy superstar Greg Daniels. The departures continued through Season 8 and Season 9, when Oakley and Weinstein were replaced as showrunners by Mike Scully, who had come aboard in Season 5. longtime fans of The Simpsons, this was a momentous change. Scully was the showrunner for a then unprecedented 4 years, from season 9 through season 12. During that time, the show went from a universally praised and seemingly unstoppable television terror beast to a hobbled old man flailing about and pretending he was still full of vim and vigor. This was when the fan approval numbers plummeted. Scully was not completely to blame, however. Point 18 as he took over the show, the all-important, and censored, creatively free writing staff was suffering enormous turnover. The chart below lists the percentage of the writing staff that had been with the show prior to the collapse of audience numbers. Note that the lines track closely with the IMDb and Amazon rankings. Just like the fan approval numbers, there's a massive drop starting in season 8. In this case, it's not because of collective opinion, but because there was a quick departure of several important writers. By season 12, the writing staff was almost entirely newcomers, with just a few diehards remaining. The stark lines above were generated by looking at the number of writers on staff who had been there from a certain season. For counting purposes, writers were defined as someone who was both credited with at least one episode as written by and was in the opening or closing credits for that season. The written by credit means that the person was indeed employed as a writer. The regular credit means they were on staff for a specific season. Those credits, assigned at the time and immortalized in the episodes themselves, are about the only piece of hard data we have about who the real writers of The Simpsons were, and they drop precipitously along with the audience rankings. There is another important thing to notice: the two lines converge over time. When David Merkin had to replace half the writing staff at the beginning of season 5, he brought in a number of writers who stuck around for 3 or 4 seasons, through the administration of Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein. Those people also began departing after seasons 7 and 8, which is why the lines converge as you move into double-digit seasons. In effect, the Merkin-hired core of writers lasted about as long as the original Simon-hired contingent, 3 or 4 seasons. You can see the same effect in the next image, which lists every staffer credited as a writer through season 12. The original Sam Simon cohort is at the top, with each column representing a season on which a person worked. As the seasons go by, the Simon writers, and then the Merkin replacements, gradually dwindle until there's only a few left. When you get into the post-season 9 twilight of the show, not only are there only a few people left from the original staff, there are only a few people left from the original replacements. By season 12, the only writers left from the Merkin era were Scully and Merkin themselves. Even the Oakley and Weinstein hires from season 7 and 8 had only 2 writers remaining by season 12, Ian Maxtone Graham and Ron Hoagie. That the writing staff was able to be successfully restocked once was a small miracle. It simply couldn't happen a second time. Those changes, combined with the general exhaustion of having told so many stories about the same characters already, was probably more than any show could have withstood. But the show's fate was permanently sealed when it lost 2 vital staff members, Doris Grau and Phil Hartman. Continue to Chapter 6, The Deaths. Notes and sources. 12. He lost. 13. For a fantastically funny account of this, read Valuable Lessons by Andrew Nichols. 14. Simon himself continued with the show until season 4. 15. Sex, the deaths. And if I died tomorrow, I'd be up in heaven, still doing this show. Krusty the Clown. Fictional characters can last forever, real people can't. In show business, this often means that someone vitally important to a production doesn't live through it. Sometimes a death can shut down an entire show, other times a replacement can be brought in to try to keep things going. The particulars vary depending on the person and the situation, but the production in question is never quite the same. The Simpsons suffered 2 high-profile deaths during its run. The first, and less well-known, was Doris Grau. The second, which made national news, was Phil Hartman. Both of them had a profound impact on the show, and both died as the quality of the program was already declining. died on December 30, 1995, in the middle of season 7. She was 71 years old and had started with The Simpsons during the Tracy Ullman days. She'd been the show's script supervisor since the first episode and began doing voice work in season 2. Her first part was as Lionel Hutz' casually duplicitous secretary in Bart Gets Hit by a Car. Coincidentally, that was also Hartman's first time on The Simpsons. She would do voices for the show for the rest of her life. While she had several memorable bit parts, the role that permanently endeared her to Simpsons fans was Lunchlady Doris. Part apathetic, part irritated, Lunchlady Doris was one of the many quietly unhappy denizens of Springfield. She didn't like the food she made or the kids she fed, but she had a job to do and, like so many other great Simpsons characters, she was willing to half-ass it for a paycheck. Grau Smoker's voice and tone of total resignation lent a hilarious hopelessness to Lunchlady Doris and her many other roles. In Marge vs. the Monorail, Grau had a single line as Lurleen Lumpkin, the radiant and beautiful country singer Homer had accidentally discovered a season earlier in Colonel Homer. In that episode, Lumpkin's voice had been a dulcet and sweet thing provided by Beverly D'Angelo. Just a year later, Lumpkin shows up at the maiden voyage of the monorail looking much worse for wear. Kent Brockman informs us that she's just back from her latest stay at the Betty Ford Clinic before asking her how she's been. Her reply, in Grau's gravel driveway best, "I spent last night in a ditch." The show could have gotten one of their other go-to women to perform the line, but no one else had the same ability to put defeat into every syllable. Grau's voice and delivery perfectly matched the cynical outlook of the show. She played numerous bit parts over the years: a surly coffee shop waitress, a cynical clerk at a casino wedding chapel, a rude worker at the complaint window of an amusement park. Like Lunchlady Doris, they were older women who were trapped in dead-end jobs and knew it, exactly the kind of bleak characters The Simpsons reveled in portraying. Grau was a perfect fit, and while she may not have been in every episode, she nailed each biting comeback and breathed life into characters and dialogue that would have been left on the cutting room floor of lesser comedies. Grau died of respiratory failure in her 70s during season 7, but 2.5 years later, at the end of season 9, Phil Hartman met a much more shocking and grisly end. In May of 1998, Hartman was killed in a murder-suicide when his wife shot him and then killed herself. He was 4 months shy of his 50th birthday. It was a stunning bolt from the blue, a tragedy for everyone who knew them, and a front-page story across the country. Hartman has always been described as one of the true good guys of the entertainment industry, and the outpouring of grief was enormous. Beyond the real-life, human sadness of the deaths, The Simpsons lost a man who was the closest thing the show had to a 7th regular cast member. Though always credited as a guest star, Hartman had been far more than that. He was famous for being the voice of 2 of the show's most iconic characters, shyster lawyer Lionel Hutz and perennially washed-up actor Troy McClure, but he had long served as a go-to utility voice for other characters. The first time Hartman's voice was heard on The Simpsons, he wasn't playing Hutz or McClure, but the bilingual public address announcer of Heaven's Escalator. That was in season 2's Bart Gets Hit by a Car, the episode that later introduced Lionel Hutz and Doris Grau. Troy McClure debuted 3 episodes later in Homer vs. Lisa and The Eighth Commandment, in which Hartman did triple duty, voicing McClure, a Charlton Heston-infused Moses, and the crooked cable repairman who hooks The Simpsons up to more channels than Homer ever dared hope. As the years went on, he played every role imaginable. Nothing was too big or too small for Hartman. He stepped up as the main, one-off guest voice in episodes like Brother from the Same Planet 19 and Marge vs. the Monorail. 20, and he was equally game to slip into bit parts, including his turn as the weaselly State Department official Evan Conover in Bart vs. Australia 21 and sleazy football expert Smooth Jimmy Apollo and Lisa the Greek. 22 and Burns for Coffin Kraftwerk. Hartman showed up as Homer's lowlife stockbroker 23 and his German plant manager Horst. 24 Many of his performances could have merited a big-name guest voice, but Hartman nailed them so completely and consistently that you almost didn't notice it was him. He was as integral a part of The Simpsons as it was possible to be. Literally irreplaceable, the show suffered deeply without him. No more Troy McClure film strips. No more impossibly poor law talkin' every time The Simpsons had to go to court. No more turning tiny roles into little pieces of genius. For a show that took a lot of glee in the tawdrier and seamier aspects of American life, losing the likes of Grau and Hartman were significant blows. They both excelled at making often unlikable characters believable and funny, and neither of them had a voice that could be replaced. When Grau died during season 7, the show was just beginning to show its age. When Hartman died during season 9, it was openly crumbling. In Grau's case, the show lost a minor but important character and a script supervisor who was one of the last links to its original staff. In Hartman, they lost the most prominent voice actor who wasn't part of the main staff. Both losses immediately limited the show's scope and humor. Zombie Simpsons would eventually bring back Lunch Lady Doris for a few pathetic bit pieces with a new and wholly inferior voice. So far, they haven't done the same to Hartman's characters. But whether or not they see fit to animate that familiar cafeteria apron, Hut's pale blue suit, or McClure's too casual sweater ever again, what made those characters so funny, so perfectly them, died with the people who voiced them. When it happened, part of what made The Simpsons what it was died too. Continue to Chapter 7, a very special episode. Notes and sources. 19. Bart, I could kiss you, if the bigger brothers hadn't made me sign a form promising I wouldn't. 20. Is anyone here an investigative reporter? 21. You're sure now? The prison train is sailing. 22. When you're right 52% of the time, you're wrong 48% of the time. 23. Season 7, a very special episode. Ah. Come on, Dad. This could be the miracle that saves The Simpsons Christmas. If TV has taught me anything, it's that miracles always happen to poor kids at Christmas. It happened to Tiny Tim, it happened to Charlie Brown, it happened to the Smurfs, and it's gonna happen to us. Bart Simpson. Season 7 began with what may have been the show's high watermark in terms of pop culture appeal and influence. Season 6 had ended with the only cliffhanger The Simpsons ever did, and the first episode of Season 7 answered the question, who shot Mr. Burns? Their parody of the infamous Who Shot JR cliffhanger on Dallas generated enormous attention, including national advertising tie-ins, a viewer contest, and news reports. Fox even ran a cross-promotional special with America's Most Wanted host John Walsh pretending to identify suspects. The episode was a critical and ratings smash, and both parts routinely show up on best of lists. The show was as big and adored as it had ever been, but backstage the turnover among the writing staff that would eventually doom the show was beginning to become serious. Of the 10 writers David Merkin had brought in to restock the staff in Season 5, only 5 were left by Season 7. At the same time, Josh Weinstein and Bill Oakley took over the all-important role of showrunner. And there was the tragedy of Doris Grau's death, which happened midway through Season 7. While The Simpsons was approaching these problems from a strong base, the kind of multi-year staff stability that had characterized the early years of the show was slipping away. The overall tone of the show remained remarkably consistent throughout the 2 years Oakley and Weinstein were in charge, but there were some shifts into more explicitly emotional or political themes, a few experimental episodes that eschewed the usual 3-act story format, and a couple of episodes that took stock of the show as a whole. Almost without exception, these were handled with the cynical disdain and witty efficiency that had become the show's hallmark, but Oakley and Weinstein had to move into those new areas because there simply wasn't much left to do within the traditional bounds of the show. The new focus didn't prevent The Simpsons from producing some of its most beloved episodes. When Lisa decides to become a vegetarian, the concept of vegetarianism isn't relentlessly advocated the way her later causes have been. Rather, vegetarianism is the butt of an enormous number of jokes, even while the show is just as scathing toward food industry propaganda and moralizing in general. When Bart, Lisa and Maggie are taken from Marge and Homer by child services, there's a briefly wrenching moment of separation, but one that is done as quickly as possible. After Lisa discovers that the heroic tales about Jebediah Springfield are frauds, the show allows the lies to stand rather than insist on honesty at any cost. Examples like that abound, and Season 7 is packed with episodes that have gone on to hallowed spots in the hearts of fans. Befitting a great season, several of its jokes are still widely recognized pop culture artifacts many years later. To name just a couple, there's Troy McClure's star turn in the Planet of the Apes musical, as well as the word cromulent, which went from not existing to dictionary-worthy in just a few years. But Season 7 does have one noticeable slip-up, and it was a direct result of the show having to push into new areas. Most of the season follows the classic Simpsons formula of rejecting television convention wholeheartedly. Whether it's Lisa only being able to make friends by pretending to be someone she's not, Marge actually gaining the acceptance of stuck-up blue bloods, or Homer successfully abusing a program intended to help the less fortunate, standard television sensibility is being subverted. The exception is Marge Be Not Proud, which indulges in the cheap moralizing and rote storytelling of the family sitcoms The Simpsons had started off explicitly mocking. Marge Be Not Proud was, in the parlance of crappy television, a very special episode. 25 Like so many very special episodes, this one involved a small family crisis brought on by a childish moral breach. Channeling countless television kids who came before him, Bart steals something. That sets in motion a series of television tropes and cliches that play out so predictably that they wouldn't have been out of place in the 1950s. Bart steals, Bart gets caught, Bart feels bad, Marge finds out, Marge distrusts Bart, Bart feels worse, Bart makes good, they hug, the end. The episode is made all the more jarring by having Bart be the one who sinks into guilt and self-pity. Bart was America's bad boy, the underachiever who was proud of it. Here he acts like every sitcom kid since television began, haunted by something he did and crushed that his mother is disappointed in him. The Simpsons had never before handled emotions that clumsily. In the first season, Marge rescued Lisa from bad motherly advice, moaning Lisa. In the second season, Marge accused Bart of ruining Thanksgiving, Bart vs. Thanksgiving. In the third season, Homer sulked and didn't want to go to Bart's soapbox derby race, Saturdays of Thunder. In the fourth season, Marge felt ignored by Homer during her play, A Streetcar Named Marge. In the fifth season, Marge threw Homer out, Secrets of a Successful Marriage. And in the sixth season, Lisa's wedding, collapsed because of her love of Homer. Genuine emotional moments were often handled within the framework of the show, and The Simpsons knew how to play them with a The episode is made all the examples like that abound, and Season 7 is packed with episodes that have gone on to hallowed spots in the hearts of fans. Befitting a great season, several of its jokes are still widely recognized pop culture artifacts many years later. To name just a couple, there's Troy McClure's star turn in the Planet of the Apes musical, as well as the word cromulent, which went from not existing to dictionary-worthy in just a few years. But Season 7 does have one noticeable slip-up, and it was a direct result of the show having to push into new areas. Most of the season follows the classic Simpsons formula of rejecting television convention wholeheartedly. Whether it's Lisa only being able to make friends by pretending to be someone she's not, Marge actually gaining the acceptance of stuck-up blue bloods, or Homer successfully abusing a program intended to help the less fortunate, standard television sensibility is being subverted. The exception is Marge Be Not Proud, which indulges in the cheap moralizing and rote storytelling of the family sitcoms The Simpsons had started off explicitly mocking. Marge Be Not Proud was, in the parlance of crappy television, a very special episode. 25 Like so many very special episodes, this one involved a small family crisis brought on by a childish moral breach. Channeling countless television kids who came before him, Bart steals something. That sets in motion a series of television tropes and cliches that play out so predictably that they wouldn't have been out of place in the 1950s. Bart steals, Bart gets caught, Bart feels bad, Marge finds out, Marge distrusts Bart, Bart feels worse, Bart makes good, they hug, the end. The episode is made all the more jarring by having Bart be the one who sinks into guilt and self-pity. Bart was America's bad boy, the underachiever who was proud of it. Here he acts like every sitcom kid since television began, haunted by something he did and crushed that his mother is disappointed in him. The Simpsons had never before handled emotions that clumsily. In the first season, Marge rescued Lisa from bad motherly advice, moaning Lisa. In the second season, Marge accused Bart of ruining Thanksgiving, Bart vs. Thanksgiving. In the third season, Homer sulked and didn't want to go to Bart's soapbox derby race, Saturdays of Thunder. In the fourth season, Marge felt ignored by Homer during her play, A Streetcar Named Marge. In the fifth season, Marge threw Homer out, Secrets of a Successful Marriage. And in the sixth season, Lisa's wedding, collapsed because of her love of Homer. Genuine emotional moments were often handled within the framework of the show, and The Simpsons knew how to play them with a light touch, using them to swiftly advance the story and then getting them out of the way. But in Marge Be Not Proud, the emotional moments don't just linger, they repeatedly grind the story to a halt so that the audience can be assaulted by the obvious time and again. That tendency has grown considerably worse over time, so compared to episodes in the later seasons, Marge Be Not Proud is subtle, witty, and well constructed. But while it's got enough great jokes that it would be the standout of just about anything past Season 10, in Season 7 it sticks out like a sore thumb. It was produced right after Mother Simpson, which had ample opportunities to delve into schlock and didn't, and it preceded Bart the Fink, A Fish Called Selma and Summer of 4 Feet 2, all of which could have easily been weighed down by their heavier moments, but weren't. In Season 7, it is only Marge Be Not Proud that uses a shop-worn, moralistic plot and unfolds it at such an agonizingly glacial pace. It is a very special episode, the first one the show ever did, and the harbinger of zombie Simpsons. Continue to Chapter 8, Frank Grimes and the Phony Kidnapping. Notes and sources. 25. See the very special episode article at http://tvtropes.org for plenty of other examples. Tell Aronson and Zykowski. Share. Genius at work on May 25, 2012 at 7:17 a.m. In the fourth season, Marge felt ignored by Homer during her play, A Streetcar Named Desire. Ahem, I believe that episode was actually titled A Streetcar Named Marge. Season 8, Frank Grimes and the Phony Kidnapping. We should thank our lucky stars they're still putting out a program of this caliber after so many years. Lisa Simpson. Season 8, which ran from October of 1996 to May of 1997, has more than one episode that doesn't quite fit with the rest of The Simpsons, which may be why Season 8 has the feeling of a show that is winding itself down. Starting all the way back in Season 1, with a joke about cartoons being on in primetime, The Simpsons had always sent itself up along with everything else. Whether it was laughing at its own Thanksgiving parade float, describing its theme music as an annoying tune, quickly glancing at the fourth wall, or making jokes about the endless merchandise Fox cranked out with abandon, the show often found lighthearted ways to poke fun at itself and its success. Starting in Season 8 though, the tone of those jokes changed markedly. Where the show had once been fond of an occasional subtle nudge to let the audience know that it was aware of the absurdities of episodic television, Burns never remembering Homer, Marge reminding Bart that he hasn't used any of his famous catchphrases in 4 years, now it seemed exasperated or downright indifferent. For all its great moments, the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show is about nothing so much as the show throwing up its hands at its own audience. And when Baby Burns ends with a spontaneous party after a dire and rather lengthy police chase, Homer shrugs his shoulders and says, it doesn't have to make sense. That episode, which had Rodney Dangerfield as the long-lost son of Mr. Burns, also showcased the increasingly stupid and invincible nature of Homer. More than any previous year, Season 8 saw Homer acting outrageously for the sake of being outrageous. The third act of Baby Burns is Homer's cartoonish efforts to stage a phony kidnapping, the purpose of which is to get Mr. Burns to admit he loves his son. It was the kind of frenetic scheme that sitcom characters have been doing since the days of I Love Lucy, but it wasn't something Homer had done before. The elaborate and energetic nature of Homer's scheme in Baby Burns was jarringly out of character for a man who had, a mere 2 seasons earlier, been kicked out of his own secret society for being too much of a dullard. He'd once gotten himself and his son lost at sea by being too lazy and stupid to row to shore, and he fell asleep while his family was being attacked by Sideshow Bob. Just the previous year he took lethargy to new widths by purposely getting fat enough to work from home. Now, out of the blue, he launched himself into an action movie worth of stunts over the mildly hurt feelings of a man he'd just met. As odd as that was, the crowning moment of the show's new fondness for acknowledging its zaniness and its own shortcomings was Homer's enemy, better known as the Frank Grimes episode. Through more than 150 episodes, at that point, Homer had fallen down Springfield Gorge, saved the nuclear plant from meltdown, been attacked by killer amusement park robots, and been portrayed by Dennis Franz in a made-for-TV movie. To call his life abnormal would be an understatement, and the premise of Homer's enemy is to ask the question, what would a normal man think about working with Homer Simpson? The answer was grim, he'd hate it so much that it would kill him. The episode is a fan favorite, and with good reason. It's loaded with in-jokes, cultural references, and the absurdities of working at the Springfield nuclear power plant, where there's deadly acid in the break room and the autocratic boss made a dog his executive vice president. But Homer's enemy is also an admission that the show couldn't go on as it had. After inviting Grimes to his house, Homer attempts to impress him by giving him a partial list of his adventures and accomplishments. Homer, yeah, that's me all right. And the guy standing next to me is President Gerald Ford. And this is when I was on tour with the Smashing Pumpkins. Oh, and here's a picture of me in outer space. Homer goes on to ask if Grimes would like to see his Grammy Award. The scene is the crux of the episode, and is what pushes Grimes from a simple, everyday thing like hating a lousy coworker into an insane and eventually fatal jealousy. But in making Homer's fantastical accomplishments so nakedly obvious, the show also pointed to its own coming apocalypse. All of the incidents Homer recounts to Grimes came from season 5 or later, and for the show to continue, it would have no choice but to continually up the ante for Homer's wacky adventures. Far more than in any previous year, Season 8 is littered with scenes and plots that involve the kind of hyperkinetic cartoon violence and physics-defying action that is more usually associated with Warner Brothers and Hanna-Barbera. That alone would have been an off-putting change, but The Simpsons insisted on treating these moments of animated peril seriously. That insistence made all of the action sequences not only strange, but downright dumb as well. The twisted world of Marge Simpson grows dark and threatening before ending with a transparently harmless gangster brawl on the Simpsons' front lawn. The Secret War of Lisa Simpson uses an overabundance of suspenseful string music to prop up its cloying finale wherein Lisa overcomes adversity just like they always do on TV. In Marge We Trust actually ends with Reverend Lovejoy battling apes who've managed to capture Ned Flanders. Many of these sequences are short, funny and downright tame compared to the cartoonish nonsense that would come in a few seasons. But they were also startlingly out of place in a show that had never made use of them before. The Simpsons was increasingly relying on cartoonish tricks and danger-free action sequences to tell its stories, and was making those parts even harder to swallow by playing the over-the-top moments of animated madness for suspense instead of comedy. In The Homer They Fall, Homer becomes a boxer, and the final third of the episode is a hodgepodge of nonsense and fake foreboding. After Moe agrees to let Homer fight Derek Tatum for the heavyweight championship, there are numerous scenes that simply don't fit in with the show as it had been. Moe sincerely struggles with his ethics. Marge frets over Homer's safety. And, worst of all, the show pretends that Homer is actually in mortal danger. The action, the morality, and the suspense don't serve the story, they slow it down. There are a lot of great boxing jokes and Paul Winfield is devastatingly perfect as Don King parody Lucius Sweet, but the plot and its tacked-on emotions seem like an afterthought. This is highlighted at the end when Moe flies into the ring, picks up Homer, flies out of the arena, and is immediately met in the parking lot by everyone he just left behind. The story has long since devolved into nonsense at that point, but the episode has a few lines left for Tatum, Fox and the others, and so it throws anything that could be called believability to the wind and just has them appear outside as if by magic. Point 26. Physical danger and clumsy resolutions like Moe's rescue flight became increasingly common after Season 8. Episodes are weighed down by whole scenes of serious chases and fights as the show began to employ the kind of cheap storytelling and phony tension that's the bread and butter of formulaic cop/lawyer/doctor shows. Making matters even worse, the animation, long a storytelling asset, became a liability. After all, Springfield is populated by cartoon characters. Even the most gruesome injury or fatal fall can be shaken off in the next scene, and the audience knows it. All the taut music and sad dialogue in the world can't make up for the fact that no one is in any real danger. Off-screen, these changes are openly acknowledged on the DVD commentaries. Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein state repeatedly that they were experimenting because they didn't think the show would be on much longer. The sentiment is shared by a number of the other people who'd been on staff. And it made sense to think things were coming to an end. After all, The Simpsons had been broadcasting for 8 seasons, even hits rarely last longer. The Mighty Cosby Show had petered out after 8 seasons. Seinfeld, the other critical darling of the 1990s, only lasted 9, and had finally gone off the air just that year. A show can only stay sharp and relevant for so long because eventually the characters accumulate so many adventures and backstories that there just isn't anything left to say. On top of that, the general cultural circumstances change. When The Simpsons got started, the airwaves and the Nielsen ratings were littered with family sitcoms. By the late 1990s, and thanks in no small part to The Simpsons, there were hardly any left. Oakley and Weinstein weren't entirely wrong in thinking the show was near its end. Those charts of fan sentiment, Chapter 1, and writer experience, Chapter 5, were teetering on the edge of a permanent crash. In all the numbers, the drop from Season 8 to Season 9 is larger than the drop from Season 7 to Season 8. The plunge from Season 9 to Season 10 would be even steeper. Things wouldn't level off until Season 12, and by then there was hardly anything left of The Simpsons. Continue to Chapter 9, Armin Tamzarian and the Death of Story. Notes and sources. 26. Characters mysteriously vanishing from scenes or suddenly appearing in places they couldn't possibly be are staples of zombie Simpsons. Tell Aronson and Zykowski. Share. Orangutanogram on May 24, 2012 at 4:29 p.m.